Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast. My name is Joey Schultz and I'm joined, as always, by my fantastic co-hosts. First up, with all the new squirrel stuff coming out in Modern Horizons 2, he knows that Modern is about to get nutty. It's Matt Morgan.
So everybody that uses the internet has to enable cookies when they log on to websites. But in the UK, do they have to enable biscuits instead? I haven't really been too sure about that.
That's a good question, Matt. And I have a question back for you then. Do you need a snack? Is that because I'm getting hungry with
I do have a little bit of a sweet tooth tonight, so I could use a snack.
Highly recommend that we hit up Guillaume after we're done with this show. Anyway, up next, he's seen the new ability Trample over Planeswalkers, and he's kind of curious if that means that Wizards will also make an ability called Sorin over California. That's Dana Roach.
Here's how nice it was to get to actually play EDH in person again now that I'm vaccinated. I felt kind of nostalgic when I watched a guy try to play a game while holding a slice of pizza. So nature is healing. It's good to be back.
Nature is healing. Wow. And you know what? That's my appetite is just increasing. Are we actually a food stream now?
The all food token show.
Well, there is the new Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious legendary creature that's coming out in Modern Horizons 2. It's a new Rakdos commander. You might have seen it. It's pretty wordy.
I mean, Dana knows probably how to pronounce that. He's been able to say Asmarana Martica Dicena Koldakar since like 1994. So I'm sure that Dana can help us with instructions on how to play that one.
All I heard was abracadabra.
Excuse you.
I think also we haven't even finished our introductions, so let's actually do that. Let's introduce the show. This is the EDHRECast. EDHREC is the best deck building resource on the web for the Commander format, compiling data from deck lists all over the internet to provide helpful recommendations for new Commander decks. And here on the EDHRECast, what we like to do is give all that data a little more context. Hey, Matt, what is it that we're talking about in this week's episode?
This week, we're just going to talk about cards that are very near and dear to our hearts, all those pet cards that we talk about pretty much every episode anyways. Well, this one is just devoted right to those cards.
Yeah, pet cards are personal favorites, some hidden gems that we've used in our own experiences with them and how much fun they are to play. It should be a whole bunch of fun. But before we get to that, we want to pause and give a huge thank you to the folks at the Command Zone podcast who handle all of the post-production work on our podcast, making it look as awesome as it does. And we want to thank our sponsors for the show too.
Yeah, the EDHRECast is sponsored by Card Kingdom and TCG Player. If you want to pick up that new Void Mirror from Modern Horizons 2 so you can shut down Eldrazi and turn off free counterspells, Card Kingdom will have it in stock on the day of release. On the other hand, if you want to stock up on cards like Basic Planes that shut off Void Mirror, you can get those on TCG Player. They'll have you covered for all your Basic Planes needs as well. Just go to EDHREC, click on the card in question, and choose the vendor link down below. Doing so supports both the site and the show.
And if you would prefer to support the show directly, you can do so over at patreon.com/EDHRECast. We have Patreon tiers of all sorts of levels, whether you want to join the Discord and talk about the preview seasons that are going on. There is one pretty much at all times. We have a channel strictly for talking about all these new cards coming out. Or if you just want to have access to all the challenge stats that we have historically for the show, you will have access to a spreadsheet that features all of the challenge stats updated live as we do them. So head over to patreon.com/EDHRECast for all of your patron needs. And we even have a very special tier where we just thank someone just for supporting the show because we definitely appreciate the support. So this week we want to give a very special shout out to Leroy Spears. So Leroy, thank you so much. We definitely appreciate all of your support.
Leroy, thank you so much. And also, real quick, another fun thing that you can find on our Patreon if you are subscribed there is that we do have some Patreon exclusive content that comes out every month, including a most recent episode that we've done on cards that, decks that we took apart in the past and the logic that went behind it. So we've also got some extra exclusive content for patrons too, and we appreciate all of you for your support, and Leroy, you as well. And, Dana, tell us, who's coming up on our stream in this coming week as well?
Streaming next week with Radical Mari at the Radical Mari. So tune in on Wednesday night at 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern, and watch us at twitch.tv/EDHRECast.
All right. That was a lot of station identification, I know, but there's a whole bunch of cool content that's coming up from the EDHREC sphere, so it's really, really great. But now let's get to the content in this episode. We are talking about pet cards that we really love to play in our own decks, but maybe does that definition need to be fleshed out a little bit more, perhaps? Like, Dana, is there a specific definition or a feeling maybe that comes to mind when you think of pet cards in your own decks or other people's experiences? What do you think about pet cards as a general concept?
I think it's maybe a little bit harder to define specifically. I think it's easier to mention maybe what it isn't. I think a pet card maybe isn't a card that works in a really, really specific deck. That's just a good card in your particular deck. I think they tend to be cards that are maybe underplayed a little bit, or cards that you play a lot yourself in a whole lot of different decks. Those are the two main things I look for.
All right. And then, Matt, how about you? What constitutes pet cardness for your experiences?
I mean, a pet card to me is a card that I can't help but put in every deck, even if it's not really on theme. But it's in the right colors, so you may as well put it in there. Dana touched on it. Like, it's not just cards that are good in a very specific deck. Like, everyone has like some of those cards out there that just happen to be very, very good in a specific deck or the way that you built a certain commander. But these are cards that, to me at least, I can't help but put in every deck possible just because I love casting them.
These are the cards that give you the warm cozies, is how I kind of feel about them. It's just like, yeah, these are just cards that when I draw them, I cannot help but smile. And when I am trying to build a deck, I do try to force them in, maybe more than I should, but even then, they give me the warm, cozy feeling. It's just really great. And also, actually, one more thing that I feel like we should clarify about what pet cards aren't is that pet cards are not like the companions, for example, even though those are kind of pets. Like those don't count as pet cards. Or like Luca examples, who's got like the wolf fallen. Like that doesn't count as a pet card either. So we're going to stay away from those, even though, Matt, I'm sorry, we're not talking about that type of pet card in this deck.
I was going to say, so like Mowu and Tolsimir and all these other like wolf, dog, creature types, not eligible to be a pet card anymore. So good to know. Good to know.
Good to know. Okay. Well, let's get to it. Dana, we'll start off with you. When you start thinking about pet cards in your own decks, what comes to mind? What's one of your favorite pet cards for us to start off the show?
I'm sure. So I'm going to kind of cheat here and start off with two of them as kind of contrasting pet cards that are in the same deck. So the first one I'm going to mention from the same deck in my Asperia Supreme Judge Sphinx Tribal deck would be Overwhelming Intellect. It is a counter spell for 6 mana, 4 blue, counter target creature spell, which is very, very narrow for 6 mana, but you draw cards equal to that spell's converted mana cost. It's a very good card. This is a pet card, but this is a pet card that I think is actually a good underplayed card that should show up in way more decks than it's in. And I try to run it. It's in 3 of my 4 blue decks currently right now, which constitutes 3 of the 470 decks it's in total on EDHREC. And when you compare that to like Opportunity at the same exact cost, once you draw 4, instant speed, same everything. I don't know if I've ever cast Overwhelming Intellect when it didn't draw me at least 4 and it hits someone's creature spell at the same time. And Opportunity's in like 5 times as many decks as Overwhelming Intellect. So I think it's a really good draw spell. I think the problem is people see it as a counter spell. It's a draw spell that counters someone's creature and draws you cards. It's a pet card of mine because I just think it's really, really good and doesn't see enough play. And it wins games. Like I actually played it in a game this week and hit someone's Kagla, drew 6 cards, put them back, 6 mana, and basically they time walked their whole turn. And then I had a full grip and was able to go on and win the game very easily from that point on. It's just a fantastic card.
Yeah, all those points that you hit about that card, Dana, like it not only counters a spell, but it draws you cards, it sets them back. There's a lot going on. Like there's some counter spells that don't get a lot of play because people think of them as just a straight counter spell. Gather Specimens and Spell Swindle are 2 that come to mind that are in the same ilk as this. Like if you look at them as just a counter spell, well, sure, paying that much mana isn't going to be that good. But the fact, like with Gather Specimens, you're getting all their creatures, or with Spell Swindle, like you're getting all that mana. There's a lot of really, really cool spells in the same, vein as Overwhelming Intellect. And I'm glad that you're bringing this one up.
Well, I distinctly recall a moment when, Matt, you were playing your Vivictus as Matty the Dire deck, in which you have like a bunch of really huge creatures that you're hoping to either sneak into play, cheat into play in some way, or you're using Vivictus's own ability to sneak them into play. And you tried an Avatar of Slaughter, which is an 8 mana creature, and that got Overwhelming Intellected.
That it did.
And that was a lot of cards to draw. So that also, though, like as counterspells go, like that's a lot of mana to leave up, which I think is what kind of scares me a little bit about this card. But I think the way that, Dana, you've constructed that particular deck probably lends so easily to leaving your mana up that it's easier to justify.
Well, and creatures are just the most frequently cast card in Commander, and everyone has one in their command zone. It's just one of those things that it feels narrow until you're playing it, and then you draw it and look around and you're like, oh, I have 6 mana up, and I know that person's casting their commander next turn, and that person probably has 2, and that third person is playing a creature deck, and there's a good chance they will too, so I'm going to get something. Like, there's no chance I'm going to not see a creature spell. And it doesn't even have to be huge. If you hit an Eternal Witness or something for 3 mana and draw 3 cards,
that's not bad.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that. So, and that's kind of the floor usually, something along those lines. The ceiling is, I've hit Elesh Norns with it before. I've hit the Ur-Dragon before. Like, the ceiling is really, really high. So it's a card I love because I think it's strong and doesn't see enough play, and I try to run it a lot.
Well, given the art, Dana, I'm going to have to say that this is a big brain play.
Sure. Joey, Matt's really rubbing off on you tonight. And just briefly, the contrast to that from the same deck is a card called Psychic Possession. It's an enchantment for 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue. You skip your draw step, and you would enchant an actual player with a card. Whenever that player draws a card, you draw a card. So, worst case, you're going to draw with them instead of your draw step, and, you'll still get a card every turn. But if you choose carefully and pick the right person, you can draw a lot of cards off it. Is it the best thing I could run in that slot? Maybe not, but it's fun. Like not only is it sometimes really effective, it's always interesting, and you always get a reaction from someone who's never seen it before and realizes, if I cast this Faithless Looting in this Brainstorm, I'm just giving away cards, but I can't not cast my draw spells either. It's just a card that always makes for someone to laugh or do something interesting in the game. So that's kind of the other side of the pet card coin, is one that I'm not running for power. I'm just running it in that one deck, that one time, because it's a fun card and I want to get it out once in a while.
Yeah, Dana, this is one that you've enchanted me with when I'm playing my Feather the Redeemed deck, because the whole deck is built around abusing those 1-mana cantrips to draw a bunch of cards. And it feels bad how many cards you will draw off of that enchantment just when I'm trying to enact my regular game plan. Like, that is a sincerely amazing enchantment that has made me want to put it into some of my own decks.
Yeah, I don't think it's the kind of thing, like, it's very easy to argue if you're playing blue, Rhystic Study is strong enough to go in any blue deck you're playing. I don't think I would make that argument for Psychic Possession, but it's a fun card that I think you just need to run some fun cards that might not be the peak of efficiency sometimes.
All right, so we spent some time with Dana's pet cards, but Matt, how about you? What are you bringing to the dinner table? The food, really, the stuff that we were talking about earlier made me a little bit hungry, so sorry for the food reference. But Matt, what are you bringing to this pet card potluck? What's going on?
You said the food puns were done, and that's where you went. So, but anyway, so one card.
Sorry, I'm hungry.
Yeah, one card that's just very, very near and dear to me for multiple reasons is Dismantling Wave, actually. So this is just a great utility spell. It's 2 and a white for sorcery. For each opponent, you destroy an artifact or enchantment, and then you can also cycle it, and you destroy all artifacts and enchantments. So you might remember when this card was originally previewed, a certain podcast for a certain website that compiles deck lists from all over the internet happened to preview this card, and that was kind of when we first started getting preview cards. So I know I personally was just very, very excited to kind of feel that validation, I guess, from, Wizards of the Coast saying, here's preview cards, but also like this card does a lot of work. Being able to essentially be a 3-for-1 at almost any given time of the game, or you just wipe the board with all the artifacts and enchantments. It's just such a great card at pretty much any moment in the game. There's always going to be targets, and I think maybe once in all the times that I have cast this card, it's not been a 3-for-1, because even if you're just picking off like a signet for one person, you might be getting something very, very big and powerful for the other 2 people. So it's just a card that if I'm playing white, chances are I'm putting this into a deck. It's just I feel like it's a Dana type of card where it's got a very, very high floor, but also like it can have a pretty high ceiling too.
This is a really great one. It only shows up in 3,700 decks as of right now, compared to like a regular disenchant, a 2-mana instant to destroy an artifact or enchantment, shows up in 11,700. So yeah, like this is one that doesn't seem to be getting as much love as just some of the other stuff that we're maybe a bit more familiar with, and maybe that's why we reach for those other options first.
It's a crying shame that only 3,700 decks wanted to put that in there, and probably like 1,000 of them are mine at some point. So I just love this card. Like I said, we got to preview this card, but also just like it's so good. It's hitting targets all over the place. I love it. Like of all the cards like Return to Dust and Crush Contraband that have been put out there to help deal with artifacts and enchantments and getting a 2-for-1, I'm okay trading off, 1 mana and then sorcery speed to pick off 3 targets pretty much any given point in the game.
And I think that also kind of speaks to a good point about your strategy, is that you are one of the players, I think, who's very you'll have the interaction a lot of the time. I think that's a good lesson to kind of take away as well. Like it speaks a lot to me, I guess, that one of the first cards that you reach for is something that makes sure that it's going to keep your opponents in check so that you can do the thing that you're going to do.
The big part to winning a game is making sure you don't lose, and this helps you not lose.
Exactly. I'll move on to one of mine now, and I know it's kind of predictable, but I'm going to talk about a sacrifice outlet that I don't think gets enough love because it's just really, really great. You know how the card Viscera Seer shows up in like 34,000 decks because people really love them having a sacrifice outlet? It's really good. Sacrifice outlets are so dang good. A card that I absolutely adore is the card Spawning Pit, a 2-mana artifact that says sacrifice a creature to put a charge counter on it. And it also has other text, but I don't care necessarily what that other text is. But that other text is that you can pay 1 mana and remove 2 charge counters from it to make a 2/2 colorless spawn creature token, which is like actually not that bad. But this is just a sacrifice outlet that is always going to sit there. And that if I need to create extra creatures, cool. But like just having the ability to sacrifice stuff at any time for free is so good. And since this one isn't a creature, it does stick around really easy, and it's hard for other players to get rid of unless they're like Matt and they're playing stuff like Dismantling Wave. But sacrifice outlets are awesome, and it's so much fun to find ones that aren't getting nearly as much love as they should. This is a card that if I am playing a deck that is Aristocrats adjacent in any way, I'm reaching for this one. I've played it in Aristocrats deck. I even put it into my Rayhan deck because it's really easy to move counters around when I have a sacrifice outlet. I just absolutely adore this thing.
The other artifact-based unlimited sac outlets you think of are things like Ashnod's Altar or Phyrexian Altar, Altar of Dementia sometimes, Card Clan Ironworks too. Those are cards that are known to be fantastically broken combo pieces. And I think part of the problem with Spawning Pit is it's just fantastic. And by comparison to those other 4 that almost always get used for something crazy degenerate, this is just really, really good. And by virtue of its peer group, I think people kind of overlook it. But you're right, it's a great card. I run it in a couple decks as well, and it definitely probably should see more play, and I totally understand why it's a pet card of yours for sure.
Oh, that's right. You use this in Vela, don't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can sacrifice your artifacts, triggering Vela so that enemies lose life. And then this makes you more creatures that Vela makes unblockable.
Absolutely.
And that you can sacrifice so that Vela will. So this is it. Oh, man. I'm glad that it's not just my pet card. We have joint pet cardness over the Spawning Pit.
There we go.
Awesome stuff. Okay, Dana, let's head back to another one of yours. Share with the class what's going on, another pet card that you've got going on. I'm trying to move away from the food metaphor. I was trying a different one, and it didn't land, so I'm sorry. But let's just keep going with it.
Well, one card I'm running in a couple of decks that I've really become a fan of in the last year or two is Veilstone Amulet. It's a artifact that basically says when you cast a spell, creatures you control gain hexproof. You have to probably be playing a deck that's going to oftentimes want to just cast instant speed spells on a whim. But if you do have that kind of deck, and I have 2 of them, I have a Talrand deck and a Kedison Krom deck that are just stacked with, probably 30 plus instant speed spells, many of which are draws or cantrips or what have you. It basically turns 30 of my spells into counter spells, or at least sometimes counter spells when those spells are aimed at my own things. It's just a really, really good card that just sits there. It requires no intervention from you for the most part, other than someone goes to remove your thing and you brainstorm and stop it.
Oh, man, that's just rubbing it in at that point. If you're like, okay, I'm going to draw some extra cards, filter my hand a little bit, and also counter your spell for 1 mana. Oof, yeah. I mean, I use this one in Feather the Redeemed, certainly, and I think it's probably kind of famous for its applicability in Feather to protect her. But like using it outside of that sphere, it's showing up in plural of your decks, and that's definitely a good qualifier.
Yeah, I mean, just take a look at your deck and see, do I care about saving my commander, which is usually yes. Am I running a bunch of instants? There's a lot of decks that are doing that. There you go. It just makes your whole deck better whenever it's in play, and that always feels good. It also feels good when it's a kind of an obscure card as well that you don't see that much. And this one was one that that didn't see a whole lot of play for a whole lot of years. So that also kind of makes a pet card feel good.
Nice stuff. Matt, we're going to head back to you. What's up on your list?
Well, I'm not really known for having a big repertoire as far as graveyard and death and all those necromancy things that you do, Joey. But the ones that I do have and do enjoy, like I go deep on them. So two cards that come to mind in this kind of realm is Morbid Curiosity and then Demon of Dark Schemes. Both of them are just absolutely fantastic cards that make even the Selesnya player like me slide it into a black deck every now and then. So Morbid Curiosity is just 1 black for a sorcery that says as an additional cost to cast a spell, you sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then you draw cards equal to the converted mana cost or mana value now of whatever you sacrifice. So I have sacrificed all sorts of different things to that card. I mean, just Ugin's Nexus, for example, turned out pretty well for me. Or even just like in my Alila deck, like you cast a Spine of Ishsaw, you blow something up, and then you sacrifice it to draw 7, and then, you get the spine back. Like, there's a lot of value. Like, if you're playing, even if just big creatures that can come back, like a Vigor, if you're playing that type of stuff that shuffles back in, man, there are so many cool interactions that you can get with Morbid Curiosity. And it's kind of like one of those Dana cards again. You just draw a bunch of cards from it too. It's just a fantastic card in so many different situations. And then Demon of Dark Schemes, this card makes me just feel feelings.
That card makes me feel feelings too.
Oh, it's so good.
Usually I'm on the receiving end of the Demon of Dark Schemes, so
because I play it. If I'm playing black, I'm probably playing Demon of Dark Schemes. This card's only in 4,000 decks. It's 3 black for a flying demon that's a 5/5. And when Demon of Dark Schemes enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. And then whenever another creature dies, you get an energy, and you can also pay 2 and a black and 4 energy to put a creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It just does so many different things. Like, it's just crazy. Like, it comes in and it's like kind of a mini board wipe, or you can use it to reanimate things. And by the way, it's still a 5/5 that has flying. Like, you can still just beat down with it. Like, I don't do a lot of graveyard things, but this is just right up my alley. There's so many uses for it. Like, I love utility cards, and this just fills that to the brim.
Well, and the moments that jump to my mind, I think you have this in, again, your Vevictus deck, because that's a deck full of really big creatures, and you want to get rid of any chump blocker tokens out there. Yep. And this does it really, really well and can summon back your big creatures. Not only that, but I think you use this in Teysa Karlov as well, because you get double death triggers from anything dying per Teysa, not just your own stuff, right?
Right, yeah. So whenever anything dies that causes a permanent of mine to trigger, I get 2 of those. So yeah, if Joey's creature dies, I get 2 energy from Demon of Dark Schemes with Teysa Karlov out. And that is exactly why, because it's not hard at all to get the energy to start reanimating things. And that's saved me many times. Like, if I'm empty-handed but I've got 12 energy, I can just sink some mana into this and some energy, and then just reanimate a few things, and all of a sudden, like, I'm back in the game. Like, it's such a great card, even if you're behind.
I'm like, I am kind of mortified from my own personal experiences playing against this card, because you use it to ruinous effect against me. But I'm also like really happy that you're embracing the dark side, Matt.
We all have influenced each other from time to time, and this is just Joey showing up in Matt Morgan decks.
Cool. Let's move to. I guess I'll move to a stripe of mine, is sort of a couple in sequence here. I just have an absolute, just a pet card suite here, a favorite for the Commander Storm cards, like Genesis Storm and Skull Storm. I think Fury Storm is the most popular one because it's probably the most efficiently costed. The Storm cards will duplicate themselves whenever, for each time that you have cast your commander already this game. The reason that I like them so much is because I play a lot of partner decks. I've got stuff like Virtus and Gorm, or I mentioned my Rayhan deck earlier. So I tend to be casting commanders twice as often as everyone else, which really amps up the power of these Storm cards. So in that aforementioned Virtus and Gorm deck, I've mentioned before that Skullstorm is a genuine finisher, because I will get like 7 copies of that spell on the stack if the game has gone long. Like, it's really, really good. But the one that I'll specifically shout out here is Genesis Storm, which only shows up in like 1,000 decks right now. And that one flips cards off the top of your deck until you find a permanent that isn't a land and puts it into play for free for you. And if you've if you've got 2 commanders and you've been casting that, just like even 1 or 2, if you get 4 copies of this thing on the stack, which isn't all that hard, you get 4 free things. And I feel like any time that I'm building around a deck that has a partner, I'm looking for one of the Storm cards immediately, no matter what the deck is up to.
Yeah, I mean, I've got blown out by that Genesis Storm from you and the Skull Storm on more than one occasion. And I am actually one of those people, Joey, who didn't realize how strong these were in a partner deck until I saw you actually cast it. At which point I was like, you get how many copies of that? It just didn't click until I actually saw it in action. And I think of the 10 different times I've seen one of these Commander Storm cards cast, 9 of them have been from you.
The last time that I cast a Genesis Storm was in my Rayhan and Ishai deck, and I pulled a Thought Vessel, which is, I flipped into a free Thought Vessel, which isn't the best thing in the world. And then I flipped into a Signet, which also wasn't the best thing in the world. But then I flipped into a Doubling Season and a Colonian Hydra, and I felt okay about that situation.
You're like, yeah, I'll sleep all right tonight knowing that's what I got.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not about the Colonian Hydra, but the signets you made along the way.
There we go. There's the title of the show right there.
Right there.
Oh,
yep.
I need a moment. That was absolutely terrific. Okay, guys, we've gone through a few. Need a moment. We've gone through a few pet cards so far, but let's pause real quick. And how about we talk about some other pet cards by challenging some stats? What do you say? There's just so much data on EDHREC, but we don't always agree with it. Sometimes we think that cards see too much play or too little play. So we'd like to investigate those stats just a little bit more and see if they're really what should be going on. Let's challenge some of those statistics.
Well, and don't forget the sponsor for the Challenge Stats segment, altersleeves.com. So you can head over to altersleeves.com/EDHRECast, and you can get all sorts of just awesome sleeves. It's just a great way to support the show as well. If you want to get some alters done for your cards, but don't want to actually have the cards themselves marked up, Alter Sleeves is just a great alternative. And you can procure some very, very special EDH reclamation sages with yours truly on the card. Or if you want to see Dana knocking over Reliquary Tower with all of his knowledge, you can certainly do that. And then just Joey looking dapper as always to go over your Sir Conrads. We have all sorts of just amazing art over there that you can pick up. So make sure you head over to altersleeves.com/EDHRECast.
This week's listener submitted challenge comes to us from Tom Caruso, and it's about the card Stubborn Denial. In particular, in Veyran Voice of Duality decks, Veyran already becoming one of the most popular Izzet commanders. Veyran is a 2/2 for 3 mana, has Magecraft, so whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Veyran Voice of Duality gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So making Veyran a 3/3. However, if casting or copying a spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it does it additional time. So any spell you cast immediately makes Veyran a 4/4, meaning Stubborn Denial immediately hits the threshold for Ferocious to trigger, making it a hard counter. So Veyran decks have a chance to have basically a 1 mana hard counter spell and in Stubborn Denial, and it's not even showing up in the top cards for that particular commander. So if you are playing Veyran and you want to protect your commander, which I assume you do, you should run Stubborn Denial. And the same is basically true of any 4-mana commander you want to protect. Stubborn Denial is a great card and should definitely see more play in those kind of decks.
And Matt, I think this is a trick that you were also using when you had a Shu Yun deck, because he was 3 power, but with the Prowess trigger, he would move up to 4. So you were running Stubborn Denial in that deck too. A pretty similar thing right there.
Yeah, absolutely was. Yeah. Prowess commanders, you want to keep Stubborn Denial in mind when you're looking at these. Like, even if you think, well, the commander itself doesn't have, the ferocious trigger to satisfy. If you have Prowess, you probably are going to be able to get that pretty easily. And Stubborn Denial just is an absolute house of a card. So yeah, if you're playing any sort of Prowess commander, definitely keep Stubborn Denial in mind.
Nice. Awesome stuff. I'll move to my challenge now. And Matt, I'm taking a leaf out of your book here because I'm not talking about blue and red and black. I'm actually talking about a a green commander,
There you go.
bear. In fact, Ruxa, Patient Professor, who is really kind to me even all of those times that I've been late to his class. I appreciate his patience. He's the really cool commander from Commander 21 who gives a slight buff to all of your creatures that have no abilities, but more importantly, makes it so that whenever they attack and deal combat damage, it will definitely hit the opponent if you want it to, rather than, even if they're blocked, dealing a bunch of damage to the creatures. Like, the damage is going to get through to your opponents on this commander, which makes it kind of tricky when you're considering, how do I pump up this army? Because a lot of the pump spells out there that you would use to buff up your army also grant abilities to them, such as Trample. And you kind of want to keep Rux's ability to just get 100% of the damage through by making sure they don't get any abilities at all. So it makes it a little bit tough trying to find the right Anthems effects. And one that I'm going to highly recommend here for Ruxa is the card Scale Up. It's a 1-mana green spell that says until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a green worm with base power and toughness 6/4, but you can overload it for 6 mana, so that will happen to all of your creatures. It won't change their text, it won't give them extra abilities, so Ruxa will just happily see that you've got an army of 6 power creatures now that he will then keep buffing up because they don't have any abilities, and he can just power through a bunch of damage here without changing the text on them. This has only shown up in 9% of Ruxa decks so far, but I really think that you should give this one a look.
I mean, Scale Up's just generally a good card and probably should see more play in a whole bunch of different decks, but especially that one for sure, Joey.
It's just like a testament to the amazingness of green pump spells that you can still be a little bit clever. Don't go for the immediate ones that, the obvious ones that give trample and stuff. And you've still got amazing options if you start digging through them a little bit more. So I really, really highly recommend this one. And Matt, let's round it out with yours. What are you challenging?
So this week, I'm going to challenge a card that, It's pretty decent, I would say, in some decks, and I don't think it's getting enough love. So if you look at Blink decks, there's all about entering the battlefield triggers and being able to bounce your creatures, flicker them, all sorts of different things like that. And a card that I don't think is getting enough play in those decks is Cunning Evasion. So Cunning Evasion is an enchantment that reads, whenever a creature you control is blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But if you're playing any of these Blink decks with a lot of creatures that have enter the battlefield triggers, you're going to want to be replaying them. So what Cunning Evasion I really think has a chance to go overboard with is when you're attacking, go figure, I am telling people to attack. So Cunning Evasion either gives your opponents a choice of take the damage or let that creature go back to your hand because they block it, and then you get to replay that creature and then get that they enter the battlefield trigger again. It's only being played in 2,500 decks total currently. I just think Cunning Evasion, if you're playing the sort of commander that wants to be recasting things like Chulane maybe, you're going to get a lot of triggers off of Cunning Evasion, getting things back into your hand to be recasted. Even if you're just getting, Beast Whisperer or the Great Henge triggers, that alone I think is probably worth considering Cunning Evasion, just because of the predicament that it puts your opponents in.
Matt, that seems very you, always managing to put your opponents into a catch-22 of bad choices.
Yeah, I try to. If it's not so bad to give your opponents a choice, if neither option is something that they want.
Can testify to this. Matt, during gameplay, loves to give me hard choices that it's like a choose your own adventure book. It turns out that at that point, either one of the options that I choose is going to lead to my end, which is absolutely great. All right, fellas, let's get back to our main topic of some pet cards. Let's go back to you, Dana. Tell us about some other cards that you really love in your deck. That just you love to reach for, that you love to see. What else is going on? What other treasures do you have in your deck list?
So not every pet card needs to be really obscure. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is in 24,000 decks. However, I think it's one of those cards that people look at and think that they want to run it in some kind of an Enchantress deck or some version of that, since most of those decks always have white and it's a way to recur whatever strong enchantments you have. Similarly, Academy Ruins tends to show up. It's the blue version of Hall of Heliod's Generosity, and it's older. It tends to show up mostly in artifact decks. The difference, I think, is that for the most part, if you aren't playing an artifact deck, the artifacts you run tend to be mana rocks, and you're not that concerned about recurring them. So like if you're just playing a deck that happens to have blue, for the most part, you don't care about Academy Ruins because, okay, if someone Shatterstorms, maybe you want to get a mana rock back, but I'm not sure it's worth having a land that does that and costs you your draw on the off chance that occurs. with enchantments, it's a different deal. At least it is for my decks. When I look at my decks, I mentioned my Sphinx Tribal deck before, but like when I look at the artifacts in there, you know, I have no need to run Academy of Ruins again to bring back Mana Rocks. Looking at my enchantment suite, things like Rhystic Study or Rest in Peace or Smothering Tithe, True Conviction just wins games in that deck. There's a half a dozen different enchantments that if someone blows them up, I would absolutely put that back on top of my library and trade a draw to get that back to recast it again. Similarly, I look at my Adriana Captain of the Guard token deck. Yeah, it's not built around enchantments. There's only 9 of them in the whole deck, but there's things like Anointed Procession or Divine Visitation that do crazy powerful things with tokens, or cards like Smothering Tithe again and True Conviction, same as in my Spheria deck, that can generate a crazy amount of mana, or in the case of True Conviction, just win a game. Same with Shared Animosity. Hall is a card that I don't think is just restricted to being good in Enchantress decks. It's a card, at least in my decks, that I run in every deck that runs white, because the enchantments in those decks are almost always worth bringing back.
I'm liking this idea less and less the more things that you listed there. Like, I finally got rid of your Smothering Tithe. Thank goodness. I was playing Matt's Dismantling Wave suggestion from earlier, and then you're like, nah, it's back. I still get more treasure. And I'm like, oh no. Or you land a True Conviction and I'm like, haha, I got rid of it. And you're just like, guess what? Next turn, it's coming back. Dana, I don't like that, actually. Please don't.
I literally used it last night on a True Conviction when someone blew up my True Conviction, and I used Hall to put it back on top and then cracked a Mind Stone to draw it again and then replayed it.
That's messed up.
And killed the person because of the double strike off True Conviction and put myself at 70 life. It's a good card even if you only have 1 or 2 enchantments to recur, because very often they are just back-breaking enchantments.
Yeah, that paradoxically, that might be the type of card that the fewer enchantments that you have, almost the more important those enchantments become. Therefore, a little bit of extra free insurance can buy you a lot of value. There, even if it's not a whole lot of versatility, it may not come up all the time. That can be really, really strong. So that makes me really, really scared. And Matt, I'm going to pass it to you because I'm really, really hoping that your pet card isn't nearly as fearsome in that instance. But I'm probably wrong because let's be real, it's you.
Well, yeah, it is me. But also, like, I have to say this card. All of my friends would besmirch me and say that I'm a man of lies if I don't bring this card up. No card has ever made me feel quite so many feelings as Rishkar's Expertise. This card just does everything that I want to do. It just draws you a stack of cards, you get to play stuff for free, and it's green. It's 4 green for a sorcery that says draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, and then you can cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Now it was like a 50-cent card for forever, and you bet I just bought a bunch because I knew I was going to put it in literally every single green deck. Well, eventually people started listening to me, as they should have for forever. And like, this card is like, it's creeping up. It's like a $6-7 card now. And man, it's so good. And I put it in literally every green deck. Like, I have it in my AC Tyrant of Gyre Straits deck. And like, that deck doesn't need more card draw, but like, it just makes me like so happy. Like, the first time that I cast and resolved Rishkar's Expertise, like, I was giddy for about 20 minutes. Like, I couldn't stop giggling. I still like just laugh to myself because like the card is so absurd.
This one shows up in 25,000 decks. Does that count as a pet card?
It is a powerful card, yes, but like, I have been on this train for so long, and like it by the qualifier of we put it in every single deck that we can. This is that card for me.
I would say that this qualifies because Matt runs it, not because it's strong, but because he just loves playing it. So I think
because
that's
I
why
love
this one would count.
Absolutely. Like, this just like makes me feel so many happy feelings. Like, the same reason that I built my Vivictus Asmati deck, like, I just want to play big dumb creatures that like make me happy. Like, that's what this card is. And I just put it in every green deck.
I'm a little dubious, but I'm going to also talk about a green card, so maybe I can't be up on a high horse about it. A card that I am really, really enchanted by whenever I can try to stuff it into a deck is the card Moment's Peace, which only shows up in like 1,230 decks right now. Moment's Peace is a 2-mana fog in green that also has Flashback for 3 mana. I never feel more secure ever than when I have this card in my hand. It is 2 fogs on 1 card, and fogs in Commander are unlike fogs in any format. This can be that is an announcement of I am both safe now during what you thought was going to be a huge attack step, and also I will be safe the next time that anyone tries to pull anything funny. This is a huge security blanket for me, and when I'm playing green, this is almost automatically one of the cards that I'm reaching for.
Yeah, I think I've seen it cast by you, Joey, more than I've seen it cast from anybody else, for sure.
Fun stuff, if you also happen to mill yourself, it's got you can just play it right from the graveyard, so you don't even have to cast it the first time, but it's good if you do then. Joey, a graveyard card, I know, but this is a really, really solid fog, and it is not that expensive as a card either, so just highly, highly recommend.
It's a solid card. I think I've seen it played more in Pauper than I have in Commander, just because fogs, they're not as powerful, but if you can find a good fog like this one, like Arachnogenesis, like Ink Shield, they definitely can make a huge impact if you play them at the right time.
So for my next pet card, or I guess cards in this case, we're going to take a little trip back to the first Theros block. And enchantment gods were everywhere, and they were indestructible. So I step up to the table and pull up my green deck, and someone plays their god, and I look down at the Krosan Grip or the Naturalize in my hand and realize I can't do anything at all about those gods. So I dug back a little bit through past Magic cards looking for green exile removal for enchantments, and don't find anything. But what I do find is an old card from the Lorwyn block called Deglamour. And then, of course, later on in that Theros block, they printed a virtual copy of it in Unravel the Aether. Cards that cost the same as Naturalize, but actually shuffle the artifact or enchantment into the library, which is good enough if you're dealing with an indestructible enchantment god. So I swapped those 2 cards into my couple of green decks in the place of Krosan Grip and Naturalize. And then over the course of just playing those cards for a few years, realized it's not just dealing with things that are indestructible that makes them good. It's way more difficult for someone to recur something when it's tucked in their library than it is when it's sitting in their graveyard destroyed, even if it's something that can be destroyed. It doesn't generate graveyard triggers like things off a Wormcoil Engine or something. And on that off occasion when someone does a Vamp Tutor or Worldly Tutor to the top of their library or does some kind of manipulation, you can force them to do a shuffle as well.
Oh, that's savage.
So these 2 cards are just my go-to. You said the word safety blanket. They're my go-to safety blanket targeted removal spells for artifacts and enchantments in green. They just solve so many problems and have a ton of extra utility. And as great as Krosan Grip is, I've gotten way more use out of that shuffle effect than I ever did at a split second.
All right, that one's nasty. Matt, let's shoot it back to you. What's another pet card that jumps to mind?
Well, let's just talk about safety blankets for a second and just talk about mine that I like playing in my red decks. Citadel of Pain is just... we're going to take an adventure back into Prophecy days. So this is an enchantment for 2 and a red, and it says at the beginning of each player's end step, Citadel of Pain deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of untapped lands they control. So this is my safety blanket because I'm really making the opponents choose, do I want to hold up mana for a counterspell or removal or anything like that, or do I not want to take that damage? It gives so much reach into games, and we all know red decks, they can struggle to close out games sometimes if they don't just storm out and win. This does a lot of damage depending on who you're playing against, but also I don't want you to counter my stuff. So if you are going to try to, you're going to take some damage to do that.
I love that Matt's all right, let's talk about safety blankets. These things that make me feel warm and fuzzy. Citadel of Pain.
Like I said, I like giving my opponents a choice where neither is a good option.
Well, and another one that I think might qualify for you here as well is Primal Order. Am I getting that one right? The enchantment that also hurts everyone for the number of non-basics that they control?
That's true. I tell people to play more basics, and then I punish them for not listening to me. So yes,
that's perfect.
But also Price of Glory is another just fantastic type of card like this, where if somebody taps lands on somebody else's turn, they have to sacrifice that land. And like land destruction can be a slippery slope, but I played my Omnath deck where I have all the mana, but then like if you have a Titanian play, you get all these death triggers. I'm going to recur all those lands anyways. Like it can get out of hand, and like it's a very high powered deck too. So Price of Glory, Citadel of Pain, Primal Order, like all of these cards. And Dana actually can blame himself for telling me about Primal Order, because I didn't know this card existed until he featured on the Challenge of Stats a while back.
And it's done a ton of damage to me in games as well over the last year.
Really and really truly has. All right, that's awesome. I want to throw out one more of mine here, which is also kind of a fun finisher that I just can't help but like, I want to put this type of effect into a whole bunch of decks because I like having a big creature that I can manipulate in ways other than just combat to affect my opponents and seal the game. Let's talk about Essence Harvest for a little bit. Essence Harvest is a 3-mana sorcery that says target player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. I have this in at least 2 decks right now, because Graven, for example, will get very, very large whenever I've lost life. He will just buff himself up. And then I also have a deck like Rayhan that I've mentioned before, where the creatures get to silly sizes there. But relying just upon combat is kind of thorny sometimes, might get chump blocked or something like that. And so it's nice that when my opponents think that they're perfectly safe behind their nice pillow forts, I can just be like, yeah, I've got this Essence Harvest thing right here that I'm just going to have my creature that is a 30 drain 30 life from you right now without me even needing to move to the combat step.
Yeah, it's such a good card. I currently have it in my Crash Fling deck, and years and years ago when I had a big mana Drana deck, fantastic in there as well. So this is a card that definitely probably should see more play, but it is very much a Joey card. I can see why you like it for sure.
It's like only 1,400 decks right now, but it's really good. And Matt, I'm sorry that I'm using spells that mean I don't have to move to the combat step. I hope you don't take that as a personal slight.
I mean, I get it. I also very much enjoy resolving a Chandra's Ignition, which is similar card along these lines. And I know Dana's cast Chandra's Ignition aplenty. So yeah, I get it. I appreciate it. And I won't fault you for wanting to dome somebody, because it is still based off your creatures, and that's what really counts.
Guys, do you think we have time for just like one more each? Dana, let's do a lightning round. What's another pet card that strikes you?
Another pet card of mine that I run, I think, in every red deck would be, and it's a new one, it's Light Up the Stage. I'm a big fan of red impulse draw. I do tend to do combat damage stuff, so I'm often swinging in, which means Light Up the Stage winds up being 1 mana to impulse 2 cards. That's really, really efficient, and I love efficient draw spells. So if we want to talk about like pet cards as a category, anything that I can draw 2 cards for 2 mana makes me happy. And in this case, it's 1 mana, but Chart a Course or the new Expressive Iteration or Night's Whisper or Sign in Blood, 2 mana, draw 2 is one of my favorite things to do in Magic.
That is pretty darn terrific. One that I wanted to shout out here too, which maybe I won't submit it as an official pet card, maybe it is, but like, Dana, you also introduced me to the card Minions Murmurs, which is a 4-mana sorcery. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creatures you control. That has also escalated to being one of my favorite types of draw spells in black, because it's actually pretty easy to control for that. There's the card Pact of the Serpent that's a little bit similar to it, but has a tribal bend. And this is just really good. I have a token deck that uses this. It feels really good if I'm playing any type of tribal deck that includes black, because I will have a lot of creatures in play. Like, that's another one of those draw spells that is just like sneaky good, and yet only like 600 people are playing.
Yeah, it was phenomenal back when I actually had the Edgar Markov deck, because the way that deck worked tended to be drop a 1-drop on turn 1, drop 2 1-drops on turn 2 or something. Turn 4 would roll around and your hand would be empty, and then you cast Minions Murmurs and draw 14 cards or something. And it doesn't matter how much life you lost at that point. Your board site is bigger than anybody else's, and you have more gas than anybody else. That card is super, super good in the decks where it works.
Indeed. And Matt, let's move to you now.
So if we're lightning round, I'm going to cheat 2 into play. Both of them are I like turning things sideways. So 2 cards that I think are just the most rewarding for turning creatures sideways: Throne of the God Pharaoh and Harvest Season. Throne of the God Pharaoh has rubbed off on Dana a little bit. I saw it creeping up in a couple decks of his lately. But Throwing the God Pharaoh is just fantastic. If you end up with a lot of tapped creatures, just at the beginning of your end step, every opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So if you attack, it's just giving you even more reach. And then Harvest Season, say you attack, you want to follow up in your second main phase, cast a Mega Rampant Growth for 3 mana, which just, you search your library for X basic lands, put them into play tapped, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control. It is super powerful. Any way that I can reward myself even more and just pat myself on the back for, you know what, Matt, that was a really good combat step. Let's keep this ball rolling. I'm on board for that. So yeah, both of those cards they're so great, and they're not played too terribly much either.
I came really close to killing Matt on our stream last week at twitch.tv/EDHRECast using some of the God Pharaoh. I was having to use the spell Mind Games with buyback to make a Drake off Talrand, and then tap Talrand and then buy it back to make a new Drake to tap the previous Drake to try to get enough creatures tapped at the end step to kill Matt before we could pass the turn to him. And I got you to 1, Matt. I didn't have enough mana to get the last Drake tap.
But it's so good. Like it creates some very high tension moments. I remember just sitting there waiting and you were mathing it out. That was such a fun game.
It's awesome. Okay, now fellas, I guess it wound up that I got the last slot here that we're talking about. And it's a devious one at that, because I've mentioned it before, but I gotta shout out the card Tombstone Stairwell again. It's only showing up in 1,000 decks right now, but this card is so wordy and it's so silly. It's a 4-mana enchantment that has cumulative upkeep, so you have to pay to keep it around. But at the beginning of every upkeep, every player makes a 2/2 zombie with haste for each creature in their own graveyard, and then those creatures are destroyed at the end step. And then on the next upkeep, that happens all over again. So if you have a big graveyard, you get a bunch of zombies, and then they immediately die, and that happens every single turn. When this card is paired up with some of my absolute favorites, cards like Blood Artist that I play in a bunch of my decks, or Sir Conrad, who loves to see all of the death happening, this card is absolutely nutty. It's a little bit expensive now, but it's only in 1,000 decks, and the price might be part of that. But this is the type of card that I reach for before I've even picked my commander sometimes. That's how much I love this thing.
Similarly to how Dana used my own cards against me to almost kill me, I remember I had a Perforos in play, and you put this out there, and that led to some tense moments. For sure.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that Teysa Karlov can take advantage of, because her zombies would have lifelink and vigilance, the extra buffs that she gives. This thing is, to use a Matt-ism, this thing is bug nutty, and I absolutely had to shout it out. But it did also make me think of, and this is one thing that I feel like you guys actually kind of didn't represent truly about your pet cards, because I, looked through your deck lists, and I kept on seeing one of the same cards popping up over and over and over again. There was this whole category of cards that you guys clearly use as your pet cards that I just feel like you weren't honest about. You guys use stuff like Soul Guide Lantern in nearly all of your decks, so clearly that qualifies as a pet card, and I'm trying not to be mad about it. But
if we were worried about hurt feelings on this podcast, we wouldn't have made it past episode 7.
Oh. I'm just saying, Dana, what do you have to say for yourself? Why is Soul Guide Lantern exiling graveyards in all of your decks? What's up with that?
In my defense, I also have Scavenger Grounds in all of my decks, so that makes it okay.
No.
And I do enjoy Relic of Progenitus every now and then too, so.
Matt will
sometimes a Nihilil Spellbomb, that works well too.
Matt will keep a 0 land hand with a Tormod's Crypt in it, and I'm not kidding.
I have done that before. And if you could have reached across the table and slapped me, you probably would have.
Oh, man. So, yeah, there's a whole lot of really great cards out there. Just ones that give us those warm fuzzies. The ones that they're just, every time you build a deck, you can't help but look at those and try and find room for them. They're just a whole bunch out there. And listeners, we would also really love to know about some of your favorite cards. What are some pet cards that always manage to make it into your deck lists? What are some extra special gems hiding in your decks that you'd love to share with everyone? We'd really love to hear from you. But with that, what I think we're going to do is call this episode to a close. So, fellas, thank you so much for joining me. And if our listeners would like to get in touch with us, where is it that they can find us all? Matt?
So you can find me on the Twitters at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, Wednesday evenings, we are streaming this upcoming Wednesday. We actually have the Radical Mari coming on to play some games with us. The games are always great. The guests are also quite great. And then our plays they leave people wanting for sure. But it is a good time, so make sure you tune in one way or another. So twitch.tv/EDHRECast.
And Dana.
You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can hear me once a week on my other podcast, CMDR Central. I'm writing articles for Commanders Herald and EDHREC, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me at Joseph M. Schultz on Twitter, and you can find the cast at EDHRECast on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Plus, if you have a question for us, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Our thanks go out once again to the whole team at the Command Zone for handling the post-production work on our podcast. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, TCG Player and CardKingdom.com. You can find them using the price info links on EDHREC or by visiting CardKingdom.com/EDHREC to show your support for the show. EDHREC is also always looking for new writers. If you have an innovative idea for an article series and want to join our team of writers, you can submit your article pitch at EDHREC.com/apply, or you can email apply@EDHREC.com. And finally, don't forget, you can now go to altersleeves.com/EDHRECast and find our custom altar sleeves so you can play your decks in style while also showing your support for the cast. And stay tuned for our Patreon exclusive altar sleeve coming soon. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.